Alright, what's going on, people? Welcome to ComicsExpertise. Today I will be telling you all about Fantastic Four plus X-Men #1, written by Chip Zdarsky with art by Rachel and Terry Dodson. So this book opens with Franklin Richards' thoughts as he's thinking about the fact that he was born into a famous family, and while he's going to be known as the kid who, he was born into this family, but what is special about him because he's losing his powers? So while he's thinking this, there's an alien invasion that he stops, and the Fantastic Four is there as well, and then we cut to Kitty Pryde on Krakoa. So we see her, Storm, and they're talking about Pyro and Iceman. We see the Cuckoos, we see Quentin Quire. But what's important here is that Kitty Pryde is summoned by Magneto and Professor X. So Magneto says that they have to go and send a delegation to the Fantastic Four, because it's finally time to pay off what happened in House of X #1 when Cyclops was talking about send Franklin Richards, to his real family. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you can go back and read that. So he says it's time for Franklin Richards to come home and be with his people. So we're going to send a delegation, and given your history with Franklin Richards in Fantastic Four versus X-Men 1-4 in 1987, it would make all the difference for you, Kitty Pryde, to be there because he remembers you and he's fond of you. So Kitty Pryde agrees to accompany the delegation to the Fantastic Four's home to try and get Franklin Richards to join. She makes a pit stop, gives Wolverine some beer because, it's all he's good for is drinking. And while she's talking to Wolverine, there's some very interesting dialogue here because I just read X-Men Schism like a couple days ago. So it's fresh in my head. So Kitty Pryde mentions in conversation with Wolverine that Franklin Richards is just a kid. And Wolverine's response is, he ain't a kid. How old were you when you barged into the mansion making my life miserable? Some 13-year-old walks in and they can walk through walls or shoot lasers through their eyes? You know as well as I do, you grow up fast once you realize you're a mutant. Meanwhile, in X-Men Schism, he was all about, you can't have these mutant kids on the front lines fighting for their lives, even though there's like 130 something of us left. But whatever, that's in the past. Wolverine's being a hypocrite, nothing new. So from there we cut to Yancey Street, and Reed Richards is running tests on Franklin Richards because, as I said before, Franklin Richards' powers are draining and he doesn't want to be normal, you know what I'm saying? He's a kid who can create universes. He wants his powers, and his father is trying to figure out why they're draining and how to fix them. So having no luck on fixing Franklin Richards' powers, Franklin Richards storms out, angry that his father, the smartest person on Earth and probably in the Marvel Universe, can solve all the problems in the universe. But apparently he can't solve why Franklin Richards' powers are on the fritz. So skipping slightly ahead from there, we cut to Johnny Storm, Franklin Richards, and the Thing in a diner, and they say, we have visitors, and not the good kind. So we see Iceman, Storm, and Wolverine pokes his hand in front of him saying, if I was the suspicious type, I'd suspect we weren't welcome here. And he comes across an invisible force field in front of him. So Sue Storm just asks Wolverine, I'll ask you one more time, why are you here? So Professor X answers, and he's like, we're here about the future. Magneto says, we're here about birthright. And Reed Richards says, you're here for our son. Sue Storm has a little bit of righteous indignation, and she should, because she says, don't talk about birthright to the woman who gave birth to him. So while this argument is going on, there's a force field around the Fantastic Four and the kid. So Kitty Pryde, she gives no fucks about force fields. So she just phases right through it, and she's like, hey Franklin, it's been a while. And she's hugging Franklin Richards while the parents look on. So Reed Richards becomes the voice of some fans when he says, you're acting like you're above humanity, buying us off with gifts of medicine. Magneto, being the asshole he is, he's like, we are above them and we're above you. Professor X tries to de-escalate the situation by saying Eric is being blunt, but we are the next step in evolution and we're finally embracing it. So while they're having this conversation, granted a tense conversation, Sue Richards says this family isn't about segregation. We want our children to live in a modern society where they can learn and grow with people who have different experiences. It's why we choose to live here on Yancey Street, so we can be around people. Now again, this is speaking for some of the fans who say the X-Men have segregated themselves, blah, blah, blah. Mind you, there's a difference between segregation and separation, so not really. And that's not even to say I agree with either one of those, because if you listen to Malcolm X, and I might just put a link to a clip in the description where he actually goes into the difference between segregation and separation, I don't agree with either. I'm more of a Martin Luther King, hold hands, coexist kind of guy, but whatever.
Is it fair to say, as a generality and as a succinct way to put it, that you believe in segregation of the races?
No, segregation is that which is, Mr. Muhammad says that segregation is that which is forced upon inferiors by superiors. Separation is done voluntarily by two equals. You never refer to the Oriental community in which Orientals live exclusively as a segregated community, because they live there voluntarily. Everything there is controlled by them. The economy, the politics, the civic organizations, but the Negro community is referred to as a segregated community, because Negroes are forced to live in that community contrary to their will, and they don't control the businesses of their community, they don't control the politics of their community, nor their social life.
So Magneto gets a little too close to Franklin Richards as he says, you should come home and come with us to be with your people. And Sue Storm puts Magneto in a little invisible hamster ball, which is kind of hilarious. But mind you, pay attention, she threw the first punch. So Professor X is like, yo, release Magneto or I will make you release him. Reed Richards is like, we're not going to deal with this with your mental violations. We'll talk about this. Which gives voice to another concern that fans and I actually also do have with some of the things the X-Men do right now, which is the mental manipulation by using powers to get into people's heads, like Emma Frost did at the UN. Mind you, Professor X didn't actually have to do that to de-escalate the situation, because we cut away. But yeah, when you really think about it, going in someone's head and robbing them of their free will is kind of messed up. So Kitty Pryde takes Franklin Richards away from the argument, and they wind up in a park not too far from the Krakoan Gate, and Kitty Pryde is explaining that she's not going to let Reed Richards or Professor X decide what to do with Franklin, that it's Franklin's choice. And she tells him the Krakoan Gateway is right here, so really he wouldn't even be that far from his parents at any given time anyway. So Johnny Storm comes in and he's like, you kidnapping, really? Talking to Kitty Pryde? Because from his point of view, they're not too far from a Krakoan gate, and he thought that Kitty Pryde was taking Franklin into it, but really she wasn't. She was just talking to him, and they happened to be standing near it. So Storm comes in with Wolverine, Bishop, Iceman, and Pyro, and she conjures some wind to put some space between Johnny, Franklin, and Kitty. So Wolverine, because he's an idiot, pops his claws and goes to fight Johnny Storm, but he's met by Mr. Fantastic, who he runs straight into like a rubber band, and Mr. Fantastic just battlefield removes Wolverine like he's of little consequence, which he is. And from there, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four start to get busy. You got Ben Grimm fighting Iceman, Sue Storm fighting Bishop and Pyro. She throws them aside. Magneto has cards he's about to throw into Sue Storm's force field. Professor X is like, yo, let's not escalate this. And Reed Richards makes another good point where he mentions, my son is almost a man. In a couple years, he'd surely visit Krakoa on his own. Maybe even for good. But you've got a timetable, and that's why I'm suspicious. And again, this brings into question the morality of what the Marauders have been doing, because they've been taking mutant children out of their countries into Krakoa. Now, I previously defended this as the only countries we've seen them take mutant children out of were Brazil and Russia, and both of those countries were actually shown to be suppressing, oppressing their mutants. They forced them into military service. So I would argue that the X-Men had no choice to take those children out of those countries because their parents could not protect them. That's not the case here. The Fantastic Four can protect Franklin Richards. There's no need to take him away from his family, but like I said, as Reed pointed out, You've got a timetable, and that's why I'm suspicious. Meanwhile, Kitty Pryde just tells Franklin, yo, you should do what you want to do. And from here, since they're all nearby the gate, Franklin breaks away and he just makes a run for it. Now he runs straight to the Krakoan gate and he can't get through, but not in the same way that Kitty did. When Kitty tried to get through, it's like she walked into a door, hence why she had the broken nose over in Marauders for the first couple issues. Franklin Richards actually gets through the gate itself, but isn't actually transported anywhere. Now this shocks everybody, and they all look to Reed Richards, and Reed Richards is like, I'm sorry, I knew this might happen, so I created a device to mask your mutant gene, which prevents you from accessing the gates, which is kind of messed up. I mean, what he did wasn't messed up in the sense that all he did was prevent his child from running away. No one in their right mind would say that that's morally wrong. But how he did it was questionable. He tampered with his son's DNA to not get him to be able to go somewhere. That's morally wrong. So there's gray areas here. Professor X and the X-Men seeing this withdraw, and they say, I suspect this will resolve itself in no time, because now that Reed has treated his son the way he has, Professor X thinks that Franklin Richards is gonna come to Krakoa sooner rather than later of his own free will. And he's right, because immediately after this, we see Franklin and Valeria talking, and they're just talking crap about their parents and how they're being overprotected and treated like children. From there, we see The Thing and Susan Storm all going to talk to Reed Richards, and Reed Richards even says himself that he needs to be a better father, which if he was really serious about being a better father, he would go take lessons from Cyclops. But from there, we see Kitty Pryde's ship. It's in a storm, and she tells Pyro, go wake up Storm so that she can dispel this storm. And while Kitty Pryde goes to get some flares, we see that Valeria Richards and Franklin have stowed away on their ship. Franklin Richards explaining that he wanted to come to Krakoa, and Kitty told him to do what he wants, so he stowed away. And Kitty says, the problem is we're not actually going to Krakoa. We left New York for a mutant rescue mission. There's a boat stranded in the ocean, a refugee, and she gets cut off. And just as her sentence is cut off, we see tentacles coming up from under the ocean that lift the entire ship into the air. And we hear a voice that says, the children of Xavier. And on the next page, and where is your father? Being said by Dr. Doom. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the mutant refugees that Kitty Pryde and the Marauders left New York to get were Latverian refugees and Latverian mutants. So that's why Dr. Doom is here. And I can't wait to see how Latveria and Dr. Doom treats its mutant citizens. So yeah, that's it. Let me know in the comments where you stand. Do you stand with the Fantastic Four? Do you stand with the X-Men? There's right and wrong on both sides, but even though I'm an X-Men fan through and through, I'd have to say when you think about it, the Fantastic Four are in the right here. That's their kid. And while I personally think he's old enough to make the decision for himself of where he goes, the law would say otherwise. So like, share, comment, subscribe. This has been Comics Expertise, and I will see you guys later. Bye.